shadows hide you. I am listening. Our paths converge.
So good to see you.
Hail to you! Never lose hope.
Here, Fred Shaft.
I hear you. It has only begun. Fight on, Fred!
Welcome to episode 445 of Concede, our own podcast dedicated to making the competitive side of the game more accessible to you. It is Thursday, May 2nd, 2024 in the evening. Coming to you from Nomagon, Ohio, it's me, Edelweiss. From Northrend, Massachusetts, we have Wicked Good.
Hi.
From Teldersill, California, we have Megasa.
Hello.
And from all around the world, we have you, dear listeners. As always, thank you for your reviews. If you would like to support the show but cannot do so monetarily, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on your podcast feed of choice, as it always helps other people find the show. So, Life and Ladder. Wicked, I feel like you have to explain something to me. You shared a screenshot of a deck, and I was like, wait, well, Wicked's on the wrong side of this game.
Well, I'll get there. I basically didn't play a whole lot this weekend because I started some new medicine on Friday that kind of knocked me on my butt most of the weekend, and like to the point where I couldn't take my ADHD meds, so I wasn't really playing on ladder a whole lot because I didn't feel like I really could, especially because I didn't know the meta, and I was close enough to 11x that I didn't really want to like screw my MMR too badly, like playing off my meds. So I ended up playing I did some arena, I did some battlegrounds. Like mostly I just kind of sat and watched like whatever happened to be on the television in front of me. But so I ended up like trying to get myself acquainted like later in the week. I tagged myself down to like 4,000 trying different stuff. And like I was trying Sludge Warlock, that wasn't working. I was trying Zarimi Priest, it wasn't working for me. I ended up hitting on like Reno Breakfast Hunter, unfortunately. I hate when this happens because Sidisi already makes fun of me that I only play Hunter when I want to climb. So I was like, oh god, I hope this isn't gonna work, but it did. So it's basically a Reno Hunter, but it's running Mystery Egg that gets the gigantic, gets an expensive minion, and it costs, I don't know, 6 less or something like that. And it's miniaturized. So like you get a Thunderbringer out, it costs 3. You can, and otherwise it just does Reno Hunter things. You just make a lot of value and you hit your opponent in the face and it's fine. And I thought that was going to be, and I got myself up to 2,500. That was enough for 11x. Long story short. I thought that was going to be the most out of character thing that I was going to be talking about on the show today. And then Megasa was nice enough to collect a whole bunch of deck lists right before the show. And I said, I have a little bit of time because I'm also working from home this week because I wasn't super confident that the medicine was done with me at the beginning of the week. And I didn't really feel like sitting on an hour to an hour and a half train each way and not being able to control what I was going to eat was a good idea. So I've been working from home. And so I had some time, a little bit more time before the show than I normally do. And so I'm like, okay, let me try some things. I tried some Flood Paladin because I bought Burger Uther with gold in the shop. So I'm like, okay, that didn't go well. I'm like, okay, you know what? Let me just try a couple of games of Excavate Rogue for science, right? I titled the deck Show Research in my collection manager. Okay. So I played one game. It didn't go well. It was, I think it was against a Paladin. I don't remember. It doesn't matter. It went poorly. I queued one more game, like 40 minutes before the show tonight. I queued into a Death Knight who played Vampiric Blood on 3.
This is the 11x ladder.
Yes. This is so I had already queued into consecutive people playing Whizbang decks because I'm at the point in 11x that is low enough that people are just messing around in the climb up to legend and are doing that sort of thing. So I am at the rank 5 floor, but at 11x. That's where I am right now. So yeah, so they played Vampiric Blood on 3, and I'm like, okay, fine. So the Excavate Rogue is basically doing kind of the same things, except it runs Sonya, right? So the idea is you're playing, you excavate a bunch, you get all the cheap spells, they cost 1, you play Sonya, you get extra copies of them, and then you've got Tess and Valorok and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I do all that, right? And I got at one point, and a lot of this game is kind of like which way did the truck come from, because this was a 21 turn, 25-minute game that this ended up being. I'm pretty sure that I did over 100 damage to this Death Knight before they none of that was enough to kill them. They finally conceded at the end. So I did that. I got like down with the ship off of the first Scorpion. I'm like, okay, this is direction. This is a plan. Okay, so I'm going to play down with the ship with the Sonya. I'm going to play another down with the ship, and then I'll have Tess that'll shuffle more plagues in, and with whatever other incidental nonsense I generate between then and now, we should have enough to get there. Which would have been a great plan if they weren't also running Tony King of Piracy. And
Edel is like pumping her fist like, yes.
Yeah.
This person must have played against me at some point.
I posted in the Discord at the beginning of the show, I found your Smurf account. Because so they had both Tony King of Piracy and Fizzle. So they had played the Tony King of Piracy. I sapped it back to their hand because I figured, well, what are they going to, for whatever reason, I don't know what came over me, because I'm like, why are they going to want to play it again? They had fizzled that into the deck, drawn it, and then played it again to put more, because I had like 10 cards in my deck and they had 3. So they were turbo drawing through their deck and then playing Tony to refill when they had drawn not enough. Oh, and by the way, this was all after they had played 2 Hollow Hounds that both had 10 attack and had both attacked into multiple things. They also had at least one Gnome Muncher that was that big. Maybe a second one. I had Executes and I had Antique Flingers and I dealt with them, but I was annoyed. But, and I'd also, by the way, one of the cards I doubled up was Plagued Grain. So the entire time that this is going on, we're all just summoning 2/2s, like this endless parade of 2/2s that are coming out of both of our decks, because we both have now 12 to 14 Plagued Grains in our deck that are summoning 2/2s. And after the third time that they Tonied, they finally only had a couple of cards left, and I had doubled up. One of the things that I had done, I'd gotten what's the Death Knight Discover weapon card?
Runes of Darkness?
Yes, thank you. So I got that. I got the new card, the new weapon. I have no idea what it's called. I don't care. That summons a 1/1 pirate when you attack with it. So I got it up to a 4/4, and then I had a Valera's Gift with one of the Sonyas that I was able to double up all of the deadly poisons on. So it was like a 9 attack weapon that I was hitting them with every turn. This was also not enough to kill them before they conceded, by the way.
Well, they had the 10 attack hounds, and
yeah. But by the third Tony, then they only had a couple cards left, and they figured out that I still had damage, and they gave up. But it was that was 25 minutes of my life, and I don't know if anyone really won that game. I don't feel like I did. I feel like I got a star out of it. I don't know that I really won anything out of that experience.
We won that game because we got to hear the story of the game. And the only thing that would have made it better is if I had been the Blood DK, because then that would have been the ultimate out of character matchup.
Yes. So
see, they need to have the Shuffle Ziliax. That's my weapon with the Blood DK. This is the Shuffle Ziliax. They
had the Rogue Ziliax. They had the discount, the ticking pylon, ticking perfect Ziliax. So
can't do that. You've got enough defensive tools. You need the fatigue tool in Shuffle Ziliax. Yes. Especially if you discover a Death Growl off of Animus or something.
Yeah.
It's great.
And the only other thing, I haven't actually gotten to play this game because it's been shared in my Steam library and nobody in my family is not been playing it, but we bought a game called Rusty's Retirement off of Steam this week. And Megasa, this is something would be probably interesting to you because it's an idle farming sim that just sits on the bottom third of your monitor while you're doing other things.
Mm-hmm.
So
because my computer does, this is what I use all of my like clearing the RAM and background tasks from my computer.
Yeah, so then you have all that.
Now I just fill it with this. Yeah,
exactly. You fill it with biofuel. It's perfect. It's perfect. So anyway, the family has been enjoying that. I haven't gotten to try it yet, but it seems like they're enjoying that. And there was one YouTuber that I was watching that was basically like the video that he was doing of this game was like doing a crossword puzzle. And then occasionally going down to tend to his farm in the middle of doing the crossword puzzle. So anyway.
Well, Megasa, how about you? What have you been up to with Life and Ladder?
Well, the day after we recorded, so Saturday, looking in the Discord, scrolling through what I missed, and Hat said something about Zaremi Priest, and then Roll8 said something about Zaremi Priest, and might have been another person or two, and I'm like, what? So I immediately like added someone and was like, what? Zaremi Priest? Because we had just gotten through talking about how we'd have to completely rebuild it and, you know, can we even play this until we get more dragons? Yes, you can. Clay Matriarch. At first, I was playing a version that World 8 had done with that was a little bit slower. It had like creation protocol. It had rod in. I did this in a coaching because I had a coaching Saturday morning. And the person who I was coaching was asking me, like, can we still play Zaremi Priest? And I said, until an hour ago, I would have said no, but actually, let's try this list. So it was the first time I had tried it. And we actually did pretty well with it, but it was a little slower, so we ended up, like, leaning on Amonthul as a crutch a lot. 5 Amanthuls is still really good.
Is it better than 3 Tonys, though?
If it gets you a Tony, then it is.
Okay, fair enough.
We generated a lot of interesting stuff. There was a lot of fast decision making going on when you have like 3 Amanthuls on the board, because somehow we got them like copied on the board, and there was a game where there was a game where our opponent did something where we ended up with extra Amanthuls, and I'm trying to think why. I think it was that like we stole their Reska, and then they had stolen one of our Amanthuls, and so then we like got back an Amanthul with the Reska, plus we'd played another one that we copied, plus we had like 3 on the board at one point. Did win that game, ultimately. But after that, I was going, this seems a little slow. Went back to just kind of the previous list that I was playing, except without the Gyre Worms and with the Starlight Whelps, which is like what Vicious Syndicate was doing, and instead of Leroy, have Clay Matriarch, although you could also replace like one of the Starlight Whelps with Leroy if you want, or some people are playing Hearth, etc. But Clay Matriarch, if you have 1 copy, turns out that's fine. You can still draw the Zaremi by the time you can play her, which is no longer going to be like on 5. The Clay Matriarch, you're always going to get it because you draw it with Scale Replica. It's perfectly decent for allowing you to survive. It allows you to survive board clears more effectively. You can easily copy the mini, if not the main body. And so then that pretty easily gets you a pretty consistent Zaremi, but not on turn 5-6. A little bit later. Still did really well. Got up to about 1k. Dropped slightly before the end, but that was still plenty good enough for 11x. And haven't done nearly as well with it in the past day or two, although I still think it's quite strong, but I don't think it's unbeatable by any means. I tried a little bit of the hybrid druid. We'll mention more. That's kind of been the one that is kind of not really anything but just good stuff. So it's not spell damage druid, but it runs some spell damage. It's not hero power druid, but it runs Groovy Cat. It's not dragon druid, but it does run some dragons. You just have stuff and you just kill them. You can kill them with swipes. You can kill them with 5 attack hero powers. You can kill them with Desert Nest Matron, which remains an insane card.
Especially if you get copies from Bottomless Toy Chest. I've had games where I go like location on 1, turn 2, activate Bottomless Toy Chest, and then, you know, turn 3 you play the draw 2 dragons or something, and then turn 4, I've got like triple Nest Matron into Chia Drake or something. it's pretty absurd.
Maybe we should call it PlayStation Druid because it only does everything.
It kind of does. It feels, it's not super, super fast aggressive, but it gets on the board. I mean, dare I say mid-range deck, perhaps?
Oh, you said the M word.
I said the M word. They're coming for me now.
I mean, at that point, you may as well call it Tempo Druid, right?
Tempo Druid. Another word, like we've been having lots of lately, that can mean different things depending on who you ask.
Uh-huh.
So I had fun with that. And the other thing that I obsessed over when I was feeling a little too tired to feel like I could play well, especially right before the end of the month, I really wanted to try to keep the finish a little higher. I was obsessing over like automating my Hearthstone workflow so that like Deck Tracker will automatically open when I open Hearthstone, because I always forget until I'm in my first game and it's a little late. Or I was told that Donkey.top has a compare decks button, which I had never noticed in the deck viewer. So I set up so that I can just like bring up, I have a program called Alfred on the Mac. It's amazing if you're a Mac power user. I can just bring up its little console, paste in a couple deck codes, and then it automatically compares them for me. It's great. Using Donkey's site. So lots of quickly pull up different websites, automatically search the card library for a card so that I don't have to spam the Discord every time I don't know what a card is. I use that a lot, actually. So I've been having fun with that kind of thing. And maybe I will have to, once I get it beautifully finalized, I might have to share it for if there's anyone else out there who uses Alfred, because it's great.
I've tried Alfred a couple
like the
times,
butler.
and I've never really gotten to the point where I felt like I had enough things to justify it. But maybe this'll change my mind. So
it takes some setup for sure. It's not just like a little plug and play. And if you have a million other apps, then you might already have some of the things that it does. But
yeah, I've done what I need in Keyboard Maestro, so that might be why I've never really gone over to Alfred, because that's been how I would do those sorts of things.
Yeah,
which is like 2 things. I use Keyboard Maestro for it, but I use them a lot. So,
well, in terms of my life and ladder, I finally got to see a pulmonologist, and everything's better.
Yay!
Yeah, they after months of being in and out of urgent care and ER, etc., finally got a prescription for Symbicort, and it's been magical. So I, feel a little weird because I had hoped to be past this, right? Usually you grow out of asthma when you have it as a kid. And now I'm on a daily inhaler that I used to have when I was a kid. But I'm just glad that it worked, and I'm feeling much better these days. So hopefully that continues. I guess today will be a sort of stress test, because usually I would come out of Thursday nights doing considerably worse. Something about my office in the basement, I guess. We don't really know. That's why I've got an air filter down here now. But hopefully I'll be able to be done recording and then go upstairs and not be coughing. It is my desperate hope that this is the end of that saga, and I no longer will be just having, here's the update on my poor health each week. In terms of Hearthstone, though, I played a whole bunch of stuff basically until I cracked top 2K, and then I was like, good enough. And that got me 11x. I played some of my hand buff paladin, my super greedy hand buff paladin. It's funny because people expect, paladin beats hunter. My paladin does not beat hunter. But they're referring to the flood paladin in those situations. But I also made some really wacky nonsense. I made a Hagatha deck that is so all in that if you draw both Wish Upon a Stars, certainly if you're against Warrior, you concede. But if you're against something else, maybe you can get there with just those buffs. It's basically like a bunch of control cards, and then the only battle cries are Hagatha, Shutterwalk, and Ziliax, so that your location will hopefully draw you Hagatha, and you can play her as soon as possible and be able to do Shutterwalk on the Wish Upon a Stars, get everything super huge. Like I'm talking, 30s in terms of stats. And then, even Warrior tends to have trouble with that. And, if they keep dealing with your boards, eventually you draw Alakir and they just die because it has Wind Fury and 30 attack. So, yeah, that is a bizarre, fun deck I was messing around with. And then I was like, what if we weren't quite as all in and just played an Elemental Shaman that also ran Hagatha with the only big spells being Wish Upon a Star. Actually, it might be the only spells. And that also worked. Sometimes you get to do the thing. And you feel sort of less screwed up if you don't, if you like draw patches in the sense of drawing Wish Upon a Star, not from Hagatha. And fun fact, if you Shutterwalk into Kalamos, you can do 18 face damage. That's
sure can.
That's how that works.
You can also heal the full if things didn't go very well.
You can. Or you could pick like 3 different invocations, right? So you could like clear a board and heal and make a bunch of 1/1s. It's pretty goofy. So that was interesting. It did have some games where it's like, I have to draw a Scar or I lose, and I didn't draw a Scar.
I did, as the Remy Priest, run into someone doing an Elemental Shaman, and I was like, what? And then they just got a really good early curve, and it was one of those games where I didn't. When you have those aggro mirrors, sometimes as the Zarimi Priest, you're sitting there, it's like turn 3, and you've got, 2 1/3s and 2 4/6s and a 5/6. Or you've got like nothing. And they just had a bigger stat minion every turn. And I couldn't clear their little 2/3 that gives +1/+1 to everything that they summon after that.
I'm not running that.
So, yeah. In that particular situation, it worked out. I can't say whether it would work in your deck, but...
Yeah. I think the main reason I was interested is that with Firefly and also the 1 mana 03 taunt that has +2 attack on your opponent's turn.
Oh, the new Tar Creeper. Yeah. I don't remember what it's called.
Tar slime thing. Yeah.
There's enough cheap elementals that you can keep the chain going even on turns where you have to play something expensive, right? Like I can wait until I play Shutterwalk on 7 potentially if I want to keep the elemental chain going, because now that you've got enough 1 mana elementals, it works out. I think the 6 I was running was Shockhopper, the taunt thing, and Firefly. And then I also was running the one that gives you 2 cold spells, because that gives you a mini, and which is an elemental. And the cold spells can be relevant. I'm still not entirely sure if that's like the right thing, but it seemed to work okay. And I was less concerned about like having enough top end juicy elementals, because if my whole thing is I'm also a Wish Upon a Star deck, then everything's going to get big anyway. So, yeah, that was kind of cool. I forget if that was actually what I sort of did that climb into 2K with. But the other deck I was playing, just hilariously good, fun matchups against Warrior. This was the main thing, right? Is that I wanted to be able to beat Warriors. And that last one was basically Cube Hunter. I was playing the egg, right? The egg with miniaturize that draws a or you get a copy.
It draws the thing. Yeah, not a copy.
No, it's a copy.
Is it a copy?
It's a copy.
Oh yeah, that's right. It is important. A copy. That's right.
It'd be much worse if it drew
That's
it.
right. I had multiple elemental horse, shiny horse, whatever his name is.
Yeah, Banjosaur draws it, but the egg gives you a copy. And so I was still running Krakens, because even 0 mana Krakens are good still. And sometimes, you need to be able to activate the egg or put a Tyrannosaur in your Kraken, whatever. And of course, with Yelling Yodeler, I would just have situations where it's like, I Kraken the Tyrannosaur to deal 7 immediately, and then Yodeler to summon 2 Tyrannosaurs. Or if you stick a Tyrannosaur, you're just like, and Yodeler deal 14. It's like, there's just lots of really great stuff, and it feels good to be able to play the legendary spell for a full board. Really enjoyed that.
I did that occasionally in the Reno deck too, but yeah, it's easier when you're getting copies and then also triggering the death rattles. Yes, that makes it a lot easier.
You have to make a deck viewer with all these deck lists because I want to play all of them.
Oh no, I do not recommend.
You should just send that to Sidisi, let him play it for you. Like that'll.
I'm sure he's made one that's probably better, but yeah, it was a good time. Yeah, it was like the secret early game was sort of the best thing I could come up with defensively. I don't know, maybe there's other stuff, but you play the 1/1 that draws secret, and you've got hidden meaning and explosive trap and titan traps, and then hopefully you have your egg. Obviously, it's really tough if you don't find the egg.
You run Observer of Mists in that deck?
No.
Okay, because that can make things bigger when you're summoning a whole bunch of big things. That buffs everything.
I ran Patchwork Pals, and that felt pretty good.
That's just a good card.
That's just yeah. Because that's one of the things the Reno deck does is that you'll Observer of Myths, and then you'll pop either the egg or you'll pop a camouflage mounted minion or something like that, and then all that stuff kind of pops out, or the Thunderbringer, right? So you pop the Thunderbringer, it summons the 2 things that buffs everything else on the board too, and then hopefully you have an egg on board so you can buff, so now the egg can attack, so you can get a copy of something that's left in the deck, that sort of thing.
Well, perhaps I'll have to try that one. I was not running Thunderbringer because I was focused on getting as many Tyrannosaurs as possible, and such that when they've spent all their removal on my complicated, Kraken boards, etc., I finally play the legendary spell, and they're like, "Oh, if I clear this, I die."
Well, the thing that you're pulling out of the with the Thunderbringer, aside from another Thunderbringer, if you're getting a copy of it, is Obsidian Revenant in the Reno deck.
Yeah, I did consider that, and then I was looking at the deck with 2 Obsidian Revenants and Thunderbringer, and I was like, this is too heavy.
When it's 1, it's a little bit easier. When it's 2, that's kind of a bridge too far.
Yeah. But anyway, we actually probably spent a little bit too long on that because there's a fair amount to talk about, even though I know we already covered the patch. News isn't going to be too big, and there's no tournaments, but Decksplanations is basically more talking about the meta and also how the patch panned out. A few different things. Some philosophical discussions to be had.
When we have to talk about our feelings, it always takes a little bit longer.
Of course.
So, but yeah, we do have a little bit of news, so let's get into that.
Gadgets and Gazette always gets the scoop.
All right, so to start with, we got patch 29.2.3 today, which is a server-side patch only. The headliner for that patch is that it's making some changes to duos, just some kind of minor tweaks. Heroes have a separate armor level in duos than they have in standard. What do we call non-duos battlegrounds? What do we do?
Battlegrounds? It's duos and battlegrounds. There's no duos standard.
Solo battlegrounds. That's what it says in the patch.
Sure.
That's so sure.
Solo battlegrounds, duos. Yeah. Battlegrounds.
So it used to be that they would have the same armor level. Now they have different armor levels, so those heroes can be balanced. The heroes that are in both modes can be balanced separately. They're adding a little bit more time to duos turns after turn 7, especially when you're having to talk that over if you're on a call or trying to decipher pings from your partner. Those can take a little bit more time, so they're giving you a little bit more time there. And they fixed the bug with mechs, so mechs will be reactivated in battlegrounds. They had been taken out. I'm not sure which one of the bugs. There was a bug causing game crashes that they fixed in Battlegrounds. I'm assuming that was related, but it doesn't say specifically what was causing that. But the two main changes for Constructed, one is that they have finally fixed the Alex Straza bug that was being exploited in some of the Excavate Warlock decks. The official statement is fix the bug where Alex Straza's battle cry effect didn't work properly with life total adjusting effects like Azurite Snake and Vampiric Blood. So what would happen is that if you had, I don't know how many times you had to snake your opponent. I would assume that if you got them below 15, then Alex Straza would just OTK your opponent immediately.
If you had played 3 snakes, what it would do is it would set them to 15, and then it would go minus 21 from the snakes, and then they would die.
Yeah. So it was actually setting their life to 15 and then applying the life drain effect from the snake after
from the
that.
Snakes that you've already played. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that was a bug. Yeah.
So now when you play Alex Straza, regardless of how many snakes you've played, it will set them to 15. Or I don't know if your max health is below 15, if it'll set you just to that. That's not clear because we haven't seen how it actually is supposed to work. Right. So if you got hit for 21 with snakes, right? So you're at 9 max health and you get Alex Straza, will it set you to 15? It says set you to 15, but would it actually set you to 15 or set you to 9? I'm not sure.
Oh, yeah. In terms of max health, I don't know.
Because it doesn't change your max health. It just puts you at 15. I guess we'll have to have somebody do science.
I'm not sure. I just was amused because it says like Azurite Snake and Vampiric Blood, which makes me wonder if anyone ever was sitting at 40 life, got Alex Straza, and then was at 25.
I would assume it would work the same way. Yeah, because if those were all being applied after. So, okay. Sure. They also fix a bug where diamond cards weren't offering rerolls since patch 29.2. So they don't say if there's if you're going to get the rerolls. I think they already granted the rerolls in a prior push, but now if you buy a diamond card going forward, it will grant a reroll. So those are the fixes to in that patch. We also Heroic Tavern Brawl is live, which means that we should be expecting an announcement of the next patch, which will have the mini set in about a week. So we'll hopefully be talking about that. We don't, that's not necessarily, any privileged knowledge. It's just the kind of general calendar that you get with the cadences that we have a Battlegrounds patch, then we get Heroic Tavern Brawl, and usually the day after the Heroic Tavern Brawl ends, then we get the announcement for the mini set.
It has been basically like clockwork.
Yeah.
At this point.
Or several expansions.
Yes. I don't know if it'll be Tuesday or Thursday, like those are the patch days, but that's basically how it goes down. Regardless, next week, either we will have a day or a couple of days of having played with it by the time we record the show. So that's cool.
Yeah.
Should be an exciting weekend because they generally just do like Twitter posts with, each class until they release it, right? So over the course of the weekend, it'll be like, here's a post of this class, and then here's a post of this class, and
well, so because the Tavern Brawl just started, the Tavern Brawl will be going through Wednesday.
Yeah.
So we'll get the announcement after that probably, and then be playing
next weekend.
Next weekend will be just lots of it.
So assuming that this
previous cadence,
So assuming that the schedule goes as it has in the past, we will have gotten the announcement that then the day that we record next week.
The announcement, right? I was getting confused. Okay.
Yeah. So, we'll see what happens, and and that may be. So we've still got probably another week and a half to 2 weeks in this meta.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, Dad, I think it was just wishful thinking on my part that stuff would be coming a little bit sooner. But regardless, I'm having fun with the Heroic Tavern Brawl, even though I did have some pretty bad luck on a couple of early runs. It was tough.
Well, maybe you should have tried bringing in the Egg Hunter And then
I switched to Hunter and it's gone much better.
Okay. as one does. Okay. So the other thing that we have is we have some shop updates. We have another couple of signature bundles. You can get Thorum Stormlord or Rockmaster Voon again for $49.99 or 5,000 runestones. If you really want one of those cards that badly in signature, then those are like it felt like we started with Sif, right, and the really good ones, and it seems like we're kind of we're getting towards the end here, because these are not the ones that I think people are really excited about. But if you have the money, you want to whale out on those, go ahead. We also did get some new portraits. We got Princess Prestor for Mage and Lanathel the Witch for Death Knight. Those are both 1,000 runestones or $9.99 USD. And then we also got for gold, for 1,000 gold or $6.99 USD. We got Shah Illidan and Burger Uther. And I took my gold that I was going to put into Heroic Brawl, and I bought a burger because that was a better use of my gold, and I am happy with my purchase.
I really liked the Lanathel the Witch bundle, and I was glad that I checked. The shop's still not working on Mac, so I'm glad I checked it on my phone to be able to see that portrait, because I really liked that one. Yeah.
Also, I found out this weekend, as I was trying to play some arena runs while not playing on ladder, that the shop being disabled on Mac also means that you can't buy arena runs on the Mac. So
rip.
And then, which meant I didn't, because that would have meant taking out my phone and logging out and logging in, and I didn't feel like doing that, so I just didn't. But that's really all the news. We're kind of, especially with the Heroic Brawl, ongoing, and knowing that a mini set is on the horizon, it's kind of the calm before the storm. Which means that we have a bunch of time to talk about the meta that we're left with until we get to the mini set.
All right, so some of this we did address a little bit last week when we were talking about the patch in the news, but we wanted to do kind of two things in this explanation. The second part that we'll do is talking about some of the decks that you might be able to play besides Warrior, as if you haven't been playing a lot of this meta. Reno Warrior with Bran has really been the most prevalent deck at a lot of rank brackets. And we'll try to highlight a few things that maybe you hadn't seen. But before that, we wanted to talk some about, more philosophically, about balance. This was a patch where the devs kind of stuck their neck out a little bit and gave some reasoning and philosophy behind the patch. I think one term in particular has become a little memed on. And that was, of course, player agency. There was a Reddit post from Evil Dave that was kind of entitled "The Current Subreddit Sentiment Summed Up in One Image," and it's Deep Miner Bran, but the type has been changed to player agency, and the battle cry says, "If your deck started with no duplicates, your weekly quests cost twice as much for the rest of time." So that is a little how Reddit's been going. By the way, weekly quests, we know that they're talking about that, so stay tuned.
Had has been saying as much at every opportunity. So
yeah.
They're
that is all
having
we know,
conversation.
but we know they're talking about it.
Yes.
Apparently, he's been a real thorn in the side of the rest of the team. And I say that jokingly. I just mean he's bothering them all the time about it. So he's making sure people are heard. He's, the conduit between community and the team. So that is very much happening.
Do we think that he is talking more about quests now than Kibler was talking about quests in Stormwind?
I don't know. That's a tough call. It's a tough one. So it's a little bit my fault that we're talking about this first bit in the Decksplanations. And that's because I finished listening to another podcast and was like, if this is the discourse, I feel like some things need to be said. And primarily that is, I think player agency is perhaps being misunderstood. And I don't even intend to say this stuff out of like defending the devs. It just bothered me to hear certain things described as increasing or lowering player agency that I felt were misaligned. So
it's also very easy to like come at things and be sarcastic or be, be down on things when you don't like. It's easier to understand what they're trying to do, and then you can kind of, at least it kind of helps your perspective. It may not make you feel any better about it at the moment, but at least I feel like trying when I see something like this that I don't like, I try to understand why it's happening, because not everything is going to be either for me or for right now, right? And this was clearly a patch that was future facing it, and there was definitely a risk that the meta that we were going to be left with after this patch was going to be suboptimal because it was intended to make room for other metas that we're going to be getting down the line.
Right. Yeah, I think this patch was fundamentally a different intended goal than other patches we've gotten. By nature of nerfing and buffing a bunch of stuff, they know that things are kind of out of their hands in terms of where it's gonna land. But when you look at what was hit, Virus Rogue, obviously, that is the ultimate easy to understand why this is a deck they're getting rid of, right? When we talk about agency, the entire deck is focused around removing the agency of the other player because you're playing as early as possible this minion that doubles itself. And I say this as someone who enjoyed that deck, right? The whole point is that your opponent can't do anything about it, and then it doubles its attack, it doubles its attack. If you get Wind Fury, you get to kill them even quicker. But the whole point is it's like, it's stealthed, and if it's not stealthed, they can't target it. That was like the perfect example. But you look at the other decks. The Gatekeeper Rogue could sometimes make a enormous board of giants on as early as turn 4. Pain Warlock, same thing. Enormous board of giants or 5/5s, turn 4 or 5. Nature Shaman, just outright kill the opponent, turn 5 or 6 sometimes. Probably turn 7 more consistently. But same deal. It gets a little murkier when you get in the range of like board clears, right? But threads, distinctly, it would be like, I made this whole complicated board, particularly if you're like, hunter and you use saddle up, and they're like, nah, drop rotation threads, like for 4 mana, and clear it all. And I think that all of these things, the whole point, and the reason they said with the focus on player agency is because these led to non-games early in the game. And that means that your opponent's deck often did not matter. What mattered was, did you hit the hand early enough, right? And now, lots of decks have got hands, and there continue to be some decks, right? Hunter can hit the nuts, and if you're not the right type of thing facing it, there's not going to be anything you can do. And that's always something that kind of can exist in card games, right? Is they just hit the hand, and you can't do anything. But there were specifically types of decks going on in a 4-set meta where the whole point was to make an insane board or do an insane thing too quickly in the game for the opponent to be able to respond. In the case of Zorimi, they actually still have the capability of doing some of those boards, right? When it comes to doing the cleric and healing, restore mana, pop-off. Yeah, funnel cake pop-offs into Thirsty Drifters. Like, they can still do that stuff. But they can't Zorimi you on 5. And I think in terms of that, this balance patch hit its goal, right? It is impossible to Zarimi on 5 now.
I Zarimi'd on 6 once. It was extremely lucky.
Yeah, like that is very, very unusual, right? And involved a lot of copying 1-mana dragons or getting a bunch of 1/1 or
and funnel
1/2
cakes
whelps,
and
right?
clergies and stuck a whelp wrangler and yeah.
So, yeah, when we talk about player agency, I think basically it's how much did your actions matter. And sometimes we see that as polarization, right? Where you feel like you lost in deck selection. And that's not exactly what we're saying. Things are going to be polarized sometimes, and it's going to feel bad. And right now, people feel that they're lacking in agency because Bran is too good. And so it's just about, did the opponent have Bran or not? And I get that. But when you have like 5-6 different decks that all have these play patterns that rob the opponent of really any ability to counter, or very minimal ability to counter, unless they just are playing the right deck to oppose. That is what they were referring to with player agency in this patch. Now, if I have one thing that I'm bummed about, it's that many alarm bells were raised about about what would be going on with Warrior, and Warrior did not get hit hard enough, and even specifically for kind of unintentional reasons, its counter matchups got flipped on their head, right? It feels extra bad that the way things panned out with Plagues no longer countering Highlander cards, that matchup is completely Warrior favored now. And same thing with Warlock, because actually of the TNT change, which I really didn't like the TNT change. I wanted to just do one fewer or have it hit one less place, right?
Or have it say once per game.
Right. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, but basically something that is less detonations. But because it shuffles a new opponent, now the Warrior wins the matchup against Wheel Warlock as well, which is tough. But they know these things, and so there's going to be more balance, and they're going to hit it. And they said as much.
Yeah. And like, to some extent, like, the Warrior thing, like, I could see a world, right, where they would have said, and, and I'm presumably had some testing behind it to back this up, right? Because, like, they're not just, like, throwing these changes out into the world, right? Mm-hmm. They're doing some testing before, and I'm sure they did quite a bit of testing internally before they did this. They changed 4 cards in the Highlander Warrior deck, right? They actually, well, I mean, technically, well, I guess they had Aftershocks also, so like 5, right? I mean, the Aftershocks change was kind of a buff, so that doesn't really matter, but like, they nerfed Sanitize, they nerfed Trial by Fire, they nerfed Boom Boss. I mean, we can argue whether that really ended up being a nerf or not, right? Mm-hmm. And they nerfed Reno. So I could see a world in which they would say, okay, yeah, Brand's gonna get a lot better, but we've hit the deck as hard as we hit any deck in any balance patch. Now, it's a little bit less because you're only hitting one copy in an Highlander deck, granted, right? But even so, like, 4 nerfs to one deck is effectively nerfing that into the ground. It just so happens that this is the kind of patch that's so different that it was still standing because everything else also took a step back. And those changes weren't as impactful as they could have been. Plus, it got some buffs on the side, right? But I think that that's something that is, you could understand, like, they don't have millions of people testing these patches. We could have the argument again about whether we should have a PTR in Hearthstone. I don't know that we're necessarily there. Maybe that's something that they could utilize the creator program to do or whatever. There might be an opportunity there, but PTRs aren't generally done in card games, at least in standard card games. Like in auto battlers they are, but in like actual card games, like Runeterra's never had a PTR either. And if anybody's going to do a PTR for anything, it's going to be Riot.
If you can define a PTR real fast.
PTR, public test realm. So it's basically like the server that we play on in Theory Crafting, right? Where you get kind of, it's a preview build of the patch that's about to roll out. So like TFT, for example, whenever there's a new set, or even like a major change, like they just had one where they introduced a whole bunch of new items in TFT. So they opened up, you have a separate login, you go onto a separate server, and then you can play games that don't count for anything on that server and then test it out, find bugs, report, they can get some data on balance and stuff like that.
And I could see some arguments against. There's people who, because one, we know from Theory Crafting that even that event, it's really hard to tell what the meta is going to be. Like if we're doing this to determine meta balance rather than bug fixes, that's still really hard. And the other thing is, if it does determine the meta balance, then people, I think, will not incorrectly feel like if they're not on the PTR, they're being excluded from the process of figuring the meta out, which, especially with new releases of cards, that there's already people who feel like there's already too much knowing what's going to happen before the patch drops. If we have even more of that, I think, then people are not having the experience of figuring out what decks are going to be good. But then a downside of that is, the devs only have so much opportunity to figure out what decks are going to be good as well. They also have been staring at these cards for a year. They had certain things in that I'm sure, and okay, this is speculation because I am not a dev, but my guess would be that when you've been working on a card, you have a certain idea of how it's going to work in your head. I mean, players do this. We think of a card in a certain box, but that's not necessarily how it's going to end up being seen by the player base, how people are going to end up playing it. I could see how you would be surprised by stuff, even though they are, the devs are experienced card gamers. They try lots of different things. That's why they are there. They sometimes also probably they spot things that we don't see. They're balancing around decks that we just don't come up with, either because we tried them and they weren't actually as good, or maybe just they weren't really thought of by the sort of content creator community. So
yeah. I mean, I would imagine, like, the thing to keep in mind also is that, like, the way we're seeing the meta is, like, there are things that they caught that never made it into live, right? Like, that's, like, people are always going to focus on the things that slip through. It's like, but there's a lot of stuff that I'm sure they caught before they got to live because they were testing them. And I do think the being excluded or giving people unfair advantage, I guess now that we have less competitive play, it's maybe less of an issue, but that's probably the more reason not to have a PTR. I think that what would make that different from like from a Theory Crafting event is a Theory Crafting event is intended to be stream and show off the cards and everybody's excited to try new things. I would expect if you had a PTR and you had some of the personalities that I think would probably be in there that think that they know better than the balance team and would want to prove it. Like I could see them like, trying to build out Highlander Warrior to do that. But like, I think that ultimately when I think of player agency, I think of non-games. Right. Yeah. And that is something that has gotten, it may not feel like it all the time when you queue into Highlander Warrior, but you've got 7 or 8 turns to break through before they really start getting online. Like usually, like once I see triple Zilliax, that's when I start packing it in. But you generally have like a window before that where like I beat a warrior today who had gone after Bran, gone in, played ETC, and then Armor Vendor, they Armor Vendor, and then they Celestial Projectionist did it in Armor Vendor twice more. and I still beat them, and I knocked off and I brought them down to 2 the following turn, right? So like you can beat the warrior, but you have to do it within a certain window before they really start getting going. But you had an opportunity to do that. Sometimes you draw poorly, sometimes you make poor decisions, whatever. Like if you don't have a card to beat Virus Zilliax, you lose. End of discussion, right? Mm-hmm. That's the difference. Like if they draw Pit Stop into Zilliax, they play Zilliax, and you don't have a card in your deck or in your hand from your deck that can deal with it, the game is over, and nothing that you did in that game matters. And that, I think that's the difference, right? I feel like we do have fewer of those games. Like it can feel like even like the Flood Paladin with Crusader Aura can feel that way, but also you let them stick a board, right? Like I've been playing, because that was one of the reasons I was playing Flood Paladin tonight, was because I got beaten up by Crusader Aura a lot. I'm like, okay, well, how am I losing? And I found out all kinds of ways. So it does feel like there is a difference there, but that doesn't necessarily, and people also are very often conflate balance with fun. And a balanced meta is not always a fun meta. And I think that's something to keep in mind too. And this is not necessarily a balanced meta, and I'm sure that they're going to get it right. Like obviously 20% Highlander Warrior and then another 10% Token Hunter is not a great place to be. I should probably look at those numbers again in HS replay to double check that. But yeah, it's still there.
I think notably, like Hunter, it's actually one of the better decks against Warrior, I feel like.
Yeah.
You need to be very careful and play it right and mulligan right. But oddly enough, the way to beat Warrior is to pressure them, is to just murder them, to be like, you want to play a 6-mana 2/4? Do ya? Like, because I'm going to hit you real hard. And often the games I lose, it's because, oh, shoot, the draw was a little suboptimal, or I did things a little wrong, and I gave them the right breathing room to play Bran, and now it's gotten a lot tougher. And sometimes you can still win from there, because doubling battle cries does not necessarily make their clears better. Obviously, in the case of Celiacs, that's a nightmare. But like, there's a lot of circumstances where you can still get them, right? Hunter, basically, it's like the number one mulligan win rate card is Saddle Up, because you just need to stick a Saddle Up board well before they can Reno it away, and a good amount of the time you can pressure them down from there. But it's funny, like, I'm not surprised at how upset people are with Bran. They were upset about the 3-mana Bran that you would play and just have it for one turn, right? And this is a permanent thing, and that's because people like playing slow decks, right? They like playing value-y things, and Highlander Warrior is a deck that just wins the value game right now, right? No one can compete.
Well, it's Bran and Boom Boss, right? It's like, that's the combo, right? It's not just Bran. Like, if it was just Bran and you didn't have Boom Boss, like if it wasn't blowing up 6 cards out of your deck, 6 cards out of your hand, the battlefield by that point, it's empty. It doesn't matter. But like, if it wasn't destroying 12 cards that you could potentially play the game with, I think it wouldn't be quite as bad. But also, the other thing about Highlander Warrior is sometimes they don't draw Bran. Like, play the deck and find out how many times that you end up with Bran in the bottom 10 or the bottom 5, because I can tell you, I did that. It happened to me a lot. I was very unhappy, and I did not feel a whole lot of player agency in those games, I will tell you.
Well, so. I think that is actually part of the criticisms that people have about Bran, is that it is so concentrated in one card. I think also Boom Boss is part of why it's obviously part of why the wheel lock matchup is so hard. I think, Forge of Wills was a really rough nerf for Warlock. I think but that did create the situation. That was also a turn 4 Giants, essentially, play. So if you have the Forge of Wills cost 4, and then that's competing with the Dark Alley Pact, you don't have that. And I think it was really more for Painlock. The fact that Wheellock also got hit by the Boom Boss nerf, also got hit by a nerf to Wheel, was
but you just can't play Wheel
than we should have had. But
I think the Boom Boss change was a misstep, because they were trying to do something about it, because it was brought up. They were trying to specifically address the fact that it's like the mirror is whose TNT hits the other person's TNT, and so they addressed that. And shuffling into the opponent's deck means that you can't just gatekeep yourself or have the draw hero power or slam or something to draw them immediately. And that's true, but I actually think we would be a healthier place right now if they had done nothing to Boom Boss, just because there would be potentially an explicit counter in Wheel Warlock. But because it shuffles into opponents now, and I think this was just a not thinking kind of thing, right? Like that specific scenario of like, oh, this flips that matchup, and by not having a counter to Warrior, it makes that play rate go even higher, right? Because it could be just as good in every other matchup, but by having a Wheel Warlock counter, it would be played less, right? Because people would be scared of hitting that matchup. So that was just kind of an unfortunate misstep.
But that's why these things are so hard, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's not just the cards that you're changing, it's the cards that you're not changing. And it's what we're left with at the end. And every meta is kind of its own organism that develops, and you don't know what players are going to do with what's left, right? Like you only have so many people that are testing the decks they're very smart people. They're very talented players, but there's only so many of them. And as soon as the patch goes live, you have millions of people all trying to break the meta at once, right? And they're going to try things that you didn't expect, or there's just like so many different things. It's like a butterfly flaps its wings in the Amazon, right? And then all of a sudden, the world ends or whatever.
Yeah, I do think the ecosystem kind of is a good metaphor, because that's something, dealing with invasive species is famously difficult, right? You bring something in and it totally destabilizes the ecosystem because you didn't even realize that this other thing was totally necessary. And then that also brings, though, to you have millions of people trying to break it at once, so they find things. But also, even so, the meta always seems, I was sitting here last week bemoaning the death of Zarimi Priest. The meta always seems narrowest right after a balanced patch. Mm-hmm. It's really easy to get laser focused on that and to miss that metas need a little time to develop. This is part of why this patch was intended partly to address certain types of decks that felt like non-games, partly to decrease the power a bit so that future expansions wouldn't have to up it as much when they come around. And I don't know when is a good time to do that, so I can kind of see why they did it. But this is part of why this particular timing for a patch can be hard, because it does feel a little exhausting to every time you get your feet, the meta gets changed. But when a meta gets changed, you do need to take a few days to see how things shake out. It may shake out and there's still a deck that's warping the format. Absolutely. But things adjust. Sometimes counters come up. Sometimes decks that were nerfed turned out to be fine. Happens a lot that is the case. Sometimes things that, in this case also some decks that were nerfed previously, like Hand Buff Paladin, like Shopper Demon Hunter, have kind of come back into being good again because everything else was nerfed too. So in terms of the definition of player agency, I mean, one, this is a somewhat Humpty Dumpty, when I use a word, it means just what I choose it to mean, and neither less nor more kind of word. But if we take the definition of you feel like your decisions mattered in a game, it's a little bit different, I think, than the skill differential of a deck, because that's really measuring one player's agency.
Completely different.
Right? And not the other player's agency. So something like Garrote Rogue obviously required a lot of skill to pilot well. But as an opponent, you're mostly sitting there waiting to see whether they do it right or not. Right? You try to set yourself up to take advantage if they do it wrong. But at least at the levels that I was going, at Married Top Legend might be a little bit of a different scenario. But at the time, I was not.
Yeah.
Not that I played top Legend ever, but at the time, I was definitely not playing top Legend. And I would just sit there and wait for my opponent to mess it up or not mess it up, and then I was dead.
Right.
So they're gaining, the top level players are gaining percentage points precisely because they're denying their opponent the ability to do anything when they play it correctly. Which is not to say that they're not displaying a lot of skill in that deck, and not to say that a deck with a skill differential at higher ranks is necessarily denying the opponent agency, but I think sometimes it's not the same concept.
Well, because it's like, what could I have done to respond, right? And yeah, if you're just sitting there hoping they screw up, that's not...
Yeah.
That's not agency.
You still don't have agency.
just because the other opponent is doing something very challenging APM wise, right? That doesn't mean that there's more player agency involved there. And whereas with Warrior, yes, if you are playing something slow right now and they have Bran on curve, yes, that reduces player agency. But because there's more time in that matchup, there's still going to be more agency involved in that game because you can, like, turn 6 takes a while to get there. You can do your best to pressure them so they're not able to play the Bran, or you can know, okay, I want to keep them from playing Boom Boss, or I want to try and Dirty Rat Boom Boss if you're a deck playing Dirty Rat. There may be minimal things you can do in that matchup because you're just playing something slower and so are polarized against it. But it's a big difference between that and, well, they had Gatekeeper into Everything Must Go, and then they followed up the next turn with a couple of Giants and Celestial and Shadow Step, and now I'm facing down 3 8/8s on turn 4. Like,
yeah, having proactive ways to respond is also part of having a counter play, I think. Having, like, if something powerful involves giving a window to the opponent, like, that is also in some sense counterplay. And I agree that where the Bran is choking out other late game strategies more than it should be. But it's not just there needs. I'm glad actually that they addressed, like, board clears in a way as a thing that can make it. You also don't feel like you have a lot of ability to do things if every single card that you play gets immediately countered for the entire game. Like, they should have to think about which clear they're using and when, or they be able to make them sweat a little bit because it takes them till turn 6 to get to their sanitize. Instead of turn 5, they have their sanitize. Turn 6, they have their. Why am I suddenly blanking on the name of this card?
Trial by Fire?
Trial by Fire.
Those happen on different turns now, right? Sanitize is 6, Trial by Fire is 7.
Yes, but at least you had an extra turn to kill them.
Right. Which I think is a big deal, right? Because that is currently, even though it may seem counterintuitive, Warrior being a control deck, the way you kill them right now is through board, right? It's through pressure.
But they sometimes do still win against the pressure, right? They're not completely...
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's actually good because that shows that they have some counterplay, right? They still sometimes can clear your stuff, and other times they can't clear your stuff. And there's always going to be some draw variance in a card game. That's part of why it's a card game and not chess, is that there's draw variance. But yeah, you're trying to get to a place where it's a little bit less. Well, if they draw the one card in the exact order, and that's what their deck is made to do. I think part of what's different about Virus Rogue than, like, current Zerimi Priest is that the deck is 100% made to just do the one thing with the Virus Rogue.
It's a glass cannon.
Yeah.
Versus
right? And if it got to do the thing, it won. Yeah.
Occasionally has a crazy turn that maybe is a little crazier than it should be. Just because I'm biased doesn't mean I won't admit that. But it's not... The deck is around exploiting something that is slower now. And that doesn't OTK you. And OTKs, if they have a way to be interacted with, then that works fine. So, like, Sif was pretty slow.
Sif is like a turn 10.
Sif is like a turn 10 combo. Even late
minimum.
game strategies sometimes could deal with that.
Yeah.
Or if you have burn, but you can be pressured because sometimes you have to use that burn to kill things. Right, that's some interactivity as well. Although I know super fast OTK decks can choke out late game strategies, and certainly the Balance team
if you
teams
have as
do
much
agree
burn
with
as
that.
Nature Shaman, then it doesn't matter, but yes.
Right. If you have so much burn, then maybe that's not a good place for agency. But they hit Nature Shaman, so.
Yeah.
And I think we've been on this long enough, but it basically, the number one thing is the faster these things are, the less agency the opponent is going to have, because they have less mana, fewer cards, all of these things, less ability to respond to what is being done. And so just nothing can compare in to, like, decks making turn 4 boards that are absurd, right? And I am presently actually still playing a bunch, and you guys know me. I like having a target, so I build greedy, complex decks to see if I can beat Warrior, and I still get really frustrated sometimes because I don't like the experience of losing to Boom Boss, but I have a plan and I know how to beat them and how to try and build to exploit their weaknesses and what turns I need to play things to try and keep them off their game. I couldn't really build to beat some of those other decks. I guess, or it was just in feels bad ways, right? It's well, I guess I have to pay the tax of running 2 Stompers if I want to beat Nature Shaman, even though they're useless in a bunch of other matchups. Or I don't even think there really was anything to respond to the Gaslight Gatekeeper rogue, right? It was just hope they don't have Gatekeeper.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. Same thing with the Stop and the Ziliacs, right? You just couldn't, there wasn't really anything you could do to cut that out. And I guess the other thing before we go off this topic, because I know I saw a bunch of people a couple days after the patch saying, well, they should just revert the change to the Highlander cards. So at least you could turn it off with plagues. I don't think that was better.
No.
I the thing about that is that somebody's still upset at the end of the day, right? Because either you didn't draw your Helya or their entire deck just got turned off. And it wasn't just the one good Highlander deck that got turned off. It's all the other Highlander decks also got turned off. Right. Which is someone who has a golden Elise the Savior in his collection. Right. Speaking from that perspective, I have not gotten to do that because, that deck hasn't been good enough, but also, well, it was for a minute, but it's also just because everything else that was being targeted also ended up doing that. And then it's still not fun it's not better if there's a strategy that could be completely turned off by one card, right? I think and if just comes down to were they playing this deck and did they draw the card? That's not better. I think that the Highlander decks being less oppressive in that way is they need to be powerful, but and we can have a conversation about the Reno effect and whether that needs to be toned down. Certainly Bran is an outlier and that needs to be addressed. I think the whole rest of the game thing is always kind of risky with something like that, where I don't really think people are really upset about the Highlander effect. Aside from Reno, or even then they're upset about the High Noon effect on Reno, and they're upset about the rest of the game on Bran, right? The rest of the Highlander cards, nobody's complaining about. Right, all the rest of those cards got buffed, and nobody's complaining about those. Nobody's complaining about the Finley that turns things into Murlocs. We're fine with that, right?
That's not a Highlander card. That's an excavate card.
Oh, shoot. Yeah.
Anyway. But I know what you mean. Right?
Yeah.
For any of the Highlander decks to have any chance, they needed to make that change regarding being able to be turned off by plagues, right? Because people would be playing it to counter Warrior, and you're well, so I can't even experiment with Highlander Paladin or Shaman or any of these other things.
Hunter,
right?
you're playing now.
Shaman is actually a little bit back in terms of Highlander. No, it's not as good as the Warrior.
Hunter. Yeah.
But Doc is still a good card, right? Particularly now that there's the elemental that can give you Wind Fury, right? So you can advance the frogs faster. I think that's a really cool interaction. But yeah, just having a thing to counter this one deck and then you sideswipe these other things that end up just not even having any hope. I don't think that's the solution.
All right. Well, on that note, I think I do find the talking about the philosophy interesting. I think that we have a lot to say, but we should probably so we cannot possibly talk about all of these lists that I put in and should not try because I put in 20. So so
the goal is that by the time we're done talking about all these decks, the mini set will be out, and then we won't have to worry about it anymore.
You can just listen to us until the mini set comes out. So I will have in the show notes a link to all of these decks. These are decks besides Warrior that you can play. By the way, don't feel guilty if Warrior is what you want to play. Like, just because a deck is a little overtuned is not your fault if that's your jam. I do feel a little, and you will have to endure the mirrors if you do that. So, you know.
That is the one reason I'm not playing it, right?
Same.
Because I love double battle cries. I would love this Warrior deck if the mirror was not so awful. Honestly, if Thogran didn't exist, I think even the mirror would be kind of cool. It would still be a little bit who gets the brand first, but at least you would have these interesting battles of like, oh, what stuff do you get off of your Azerite Ox, and okay, what's in the ETC that you end up using, right? It would be a lot of board and back and forth. Thogran is what makes it miserable. Yes. Because it just wins the match for you.
Who drew their brand and their boom boss, and that's who won. I should be in heaven, right? The best deck, and it's not the best deck in the meta, at least ostensibly, is a really slow grindy control deck. This is my world, right? I'm not playing that deck because that mirror is so bad. It is just, I did it for like an hour on my stream on Thursday night. I'm like, I am done with this. This is awful. Because again, I don't feel like I have agency, because so much of my decisions revolve around, did I draw brand on time? Because if you don't draw brand, the rest of you're basically holding on to half your deck, waiting for him, or trying to turbo draw. And especially in the mirror, if you're trying to turbo draw, you're drawing TNTs that are likely to blow up brand. So yeah, no, thank you.
All right. Well, what I think I'm going to do for these decks, I'm going to kind of just go through and stop me if you want to talk about one. And all of these will be linked in the show notes, so you can see them. Some of them are sort of more standard lists that you'll find on top of HSR or like the Vicious Syndicate report and stuff like that. Some of them are a little bit more under the radar, shall we say, and play at your own risk for any of these lists. But there are some options. So for Demon Hunter, Shopper, you can play Shopper. There's both sort of your more typical, they're calling it a mech Shopper list, as well as Naga Shopper lists that you can play. And it turns out when other stuff gets nerfed, then this comes back. And if we see more Zarimi Priest coming back, because the word's starting to get out that actually it's totally fine, this is still not a fun matchup as the Zarimi Priest running into some Shopper DHs. I'm still like, oh gosh, Shopper DH. So that is a role that you can have in the meta. On Druid, we talked about that hybrid Druid in Life on Ladder. There's also, I have here a dragon list from Insane that is, it has Sky Mother Aviana, it has the Dragon Tails. It's kind of like that John Bear list we talked about a couple weeks ago. It does have the Trog Gem Tosser that the hybrid Druid has. It has Magatha, Dragon Golem, the buffed Chia Drake. Desert Nest Matron is just an insane card in general.
Yeah. There was another version that I was playing earlier in the week that also ran Malfurion's Gift for another, either a swipe or a Wild Growth. And then it was also running Celestial Projectionist, because when 1-5 is good, 3-5 is great. Or if like one of your dragon golems lives, then you can Projectionist and get another dragon golem down.
That's true.
Right?
Any of them works. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is clever. And the hybrid Druid is just a fun deck. I think that's a nice thing to have come out of the patch, because it's something that feels flexible, but not, and it gets there, but it's never just like feast or famine, completely insane, more than card games are. So,
yeah. And Woodland Wonders is a hell of a card now at 2/5.
Yeah. I mean, getting sometimes 2/5 taunts on turn 2, it's really good.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, that is a bit of a spike. I suppose I said it doesn't have the huge spike. Occasionally, you get copies of Desert Nest Matron, you get your turn 2 Woodland Wonders, but it's still not Gaslight Gatekeeper level of sometimes you
well,
hit
and it's
your
like
spike.
one thing I found playing it was like you have to learn the mulligan. It's really because it's such a weird deck. I sort of landed on I keep Dollhouse, I keep Peaceful Piper, and I keep Splish Splash Well.
Yeah, those make sense.
I think
maybe if you have Dollhouse, then you would maybe consider keeping Woodland Wonders if you're on the coin or something like that.
There's a lot of conditional keeps, right? Yeah. Like if you already have Dollhouse, you definitely keep Bottomless Toy Chest or Woodland Wonders. The other one I would generally keep is Take to the Skies, right? Like that's just good in general. And
you keep another dragon in your hand if you have a Splish Splash Well to make sure that it goes off.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I like decks like that also with interesting conditional keep mulligans rather than just, I have played plenty of decks that are just like full mull for Serpent Wig, like let's go, that's the correct move every time, but it's fun when there's a lot of interest to the mulligan, and that tends to mean a more flexible deck. So Hunter, so token aggro Hunter is a good way to kill those warriors before they get going. It's a good way to kill a lot of things before they get going. We have a sort of more standard zoo list from Rise Was Here, peaked by Ron Mexico, with kind of everything that it's pretty similar to the deck that we have been seeing. It has Painted Canvasor. This list has Ball of Spiders, which is kind of...
I like Ball of Spiders a lot.
If you really want to maximize your saddle up value, then Ball of Spiders is the way to go.
Yeah.
And saddle up is definitely part of, like, that's a major power play in this deck if you're playing this deck. Like, you're trying to get a big board and then saddle up on it. And I think we had mentioned this at one point before, but your RC Rampage, you really want to summon, like, 4 of them. No more than 5. You don't want to summon all 6 because then they're all 1/1s. That's way less stats. Unless you're about to follow that up, maybe with a saddle up. But I had a game against a poor hunter today. I was the druid, and they made a whole board of 1/1s. I swiped it without spell damage. I didn't have any spell damage. Didn't matter. I just swiped it. They made a whole board of 1/1s. Malfurion's Gift, swiped it. Another board of 1/1s. Top deck, my second swipe. I felt a little bad.
This was my experience trying to play Flood Paladin today. Yep. Yep. That nice Muster for Battle that you had there. Shame if anything were to happen to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know there's ways to beat the Sun-Q Druid in that matchup as a Paladin. But yeah, I had a similar experience. I was just like, I faced all 4 swipes. Actually, it might even have been 5 if they got a copy of one off Bottomless Toy Chest. It was a bad time.
That is brutal.
There was a conversation in Lorinda's stream chat today about how many swipes the Druid can get, and I think they were surprised that the number was not what they thought it was.
Sometimes it's quite a few. World 8 posted a fast hunter deck with kind of like with Yelling Yodeler and Bovine Skeleton. And Messenger Buzzard and Bunny Stomper. So I think the idea is that you keep buffing your Bovine Skeletons, and they also have Fable Stable Hand, lots of things that get better with things with more attack. You have Patchwork Pals. You have Twisted Frostwing, which is the Rush Death Rattle, summon a Chimera with stats equal to this minion's attack. And I should probably specify Fable's Stable Hand was Rush if you control a minion with 4 or more attack, gain +2/+2, because no one remembers what that card did. And you can make all these things resurrect by taking the Yodeler and taking the Bovine Skeleton Death Rattle and putting it on. And sorry, not all the things resurrect. I was mixing it up with Death Growl. You can just get lots and lots of Bovine Skeletons because you trigger the Death Rattle twice. So I haven't tried that yet, but it looks fun. It has Vicious Slither Spear in it. I'm always a fan of decks with Vicious Slither Spear in them. And then we talked about the Breakfast Hunter.
Yeah.
Already.
It's not just eggs because you have bacon. You have Thornmantle Musician and Huffer. So you have bacon in the deck. That's why it's Breakfast Paladin. but it's. But you are really looking for Mystery Egg, and like I've started mulliganing a little bit more aggressively for Mystery, not aggressively, but I've been keeping it more in the mulligan, even though it's 5, and you can just play it without any way to activate it, because first of all, you'll get the mini, which you can attack with, and like they have to clear your board sometime, so they can't generally just ignore it, even though it's a 0/3, because there's almost always other stuff on board. You've got Posic, you've got Camouflage Mount to make something bigger. You've got Observer of Myths again to summon other things and make your whole board bigger. You're still running Awakening Tremors. You're running like the kind of standard early game from Hunter, and then you just have the beasts that you have in there are Mukla, Tyrannosaurus, Thunderbringer, and King Plush. This list is running Marut Stonebinder, which is the discover 3 elementals, keep 1, or put 1 on the board. I don't love it.
Yeah.
I haven't found those, like, there was like one game where I got the discover an elemental from the past and it worked out for me, but it's generally not been great. And there are probably some things that I would tweak in that list. The Speaker Stomper also is like kind of whatever. I might even, I almost, I think the first game I played with it, I ran into a Cutlass Rogue and I almost immediately swapped that out for a Viper because I never want to lose to that deck ever.
But then you'll draw a Viper off the egg.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that would be bad. I should not do that.
So it is funny that looking at this list, I was like, just going down, I was like, Speaker Stomper, I don't know how I feel about that. Oh, Marut, no, I definitely don't like that.
Yeah.
Like, I also just had a cursory glance at the cards I wasn't into. At the very least, I think I would swap Marut for Kraken again, because I don't even care if I get a copy of that costs 0 if there's good hits, right?
Or even just yelling Yodeler might be fine, right? In that deck, you've got enough Death Rattles in the deck that it's probably fine to just run 1 copy of it in a Highlander deck. But
if you happen to get the Mystery Egg.
Yeah, I mean, if you happen to get the Mystery Egg, it's great, right? But assuming that it's not that so late that you've drawn all your
with Camouflage Mount, I think, as well. I was just looking at the aggro hunter list and going, I think I figured this out. You're using Yodeler on Camouflage Mount and Bovine Skeleton and Messenger Buzzard to just draw a million things and then have them all be buffed a lot and have your Observer of Myths keep getting everything bigger on the board. So yeah,
there are some cute ways to abuse Observer of Myths in this deck. That's kind of fun, but it takes a little while to figure those things out.
We had mentioned Paladin. Flood Paladin is something that you can play if you're seeing a lot of hunters. It just floods the board, and unlike the hunter, you have divine shields and things. And most importantly, you have Showdown Prismatic Beam.
Yeah. And Sea Giants.
Pro tip, if you're facing a Zarimi Priest and they have a Chirurgeon up and you Showdown, their things have 4 health, and yours have 3 health. So just keep that in mind.
Unless you have a Crusader Aura out also, and then they're usually
and then
still
it doesn't
bigger.
Matter.
And you still win. Yeah,
you have Showdown Prismatic Beam, you have Sea Giants. So that's a very good matchup. It's like 67% favored for the Flood Paladin into Token Hunter, I think. So
it's rough.
It's rough. And, just if you like more aggressive decks, you like flooding the board, it's a fun deck. You can do Hand Buff Paladin again. Looks like basically kind of the same list that we had before.
Yeah, that's a mistake. I don't know. Well, okay, sorry. It would be a mistake if they had deputization still, which fortunately, at least this one, they've taken that out. I really don't like Acolyte of Pain in these. I mean, maybe it's fine for like the straight hand buff list. I prefer the Excavate versions as opposed to straight hand buff. But I feel like Acolyte of Pain giving control of your draw over to the opponent it's not something I like doing.
I also have a list here from Elteris in our Discord, who's been having some success with a sort of, it's a Flood Paladin, but with Earthens, so it's slower, but then it has more late game. They say they've been doing pretty well against warriors with it, actually, because they need the Reno specifically. Like, you do still have a window before they get Boom Boss and Reno on board to get at them. My guess would be that this is not as effective against warrior as just Flood hit them as fast as possible, but I haven't actually tried either matchup.
Yeah.
And when they inevitably hit warrior, this having a little more value might end up working out well. And certainly I enjoy Earthens, so I put it in if anyone wants to check that out.
I mean, when you hit that earthen curve, it's pretty hilarious, right?
Yes, and you can hold
Where
a
you
few
get-
things back, and then they clear the board, and then you just get more big Earthens.
Yeah, and generally the way you can beat warrior is just by having things that drop things when they die, as long as those things also don't die to aftershocks, right? So like mining casualties is in the Flood Paladin, that's fine. It's going to die to aftershocks, but like if it doesn't die to a Brawl or a Sanitize or Bellowing Flames or whatever, if it leaves something behind when it dies, that's why Saddle Up is so good against it, because Saddle Up just gives you a whole board of things that they have to clear 2 boards at once, and they generally can't. So anything where you can have minions that give you more minions when they die is going to be good against the warriors.
Right. That's true. That makes a lot of sense. And you do have refill with like tier and tiers. That's cheaper than when they get their Reno online. So you just want to make sure they don't Reno your Earthens.
Or big things. Big things can also kill them.
Yeah, like the Sea Giants in the
like
Flood
the
Paladin too.
In the list, yes.
It can be less reliable because they have damage agnostic clears, but like the times when I beat warriors with my Excavate Paladin is because I excavated very quickly, and so I got the dragon down, and all my minions were large, and sometimes I even play another dragon. But
and when I do that, I usually say, okay, I've got 2 Sea Giants on this board. And they have no armor. The only way they beat me is with safety goggles and a forged Sanitize. And guess what they have every time that I do that? Because I don't play around it, because I shouldn't play around it, and every time they have it anyway. So,
you just need to have more big stuff.
I need to get good is basically what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fair.
Yeah. For Priest, mostly talked about Zarimi Priest. World 8 has been experimenting with, and I was doing some as well of running Panners, and only 1 Starlight Whelp. He's still running 2 Starlight Whelps, but running Panners, keeping the Dream Boats, and just trying to kind of turbo draw. And he actually was trying Fly Off the Shelves, which I could see that potentially working. You have a lot of little dragons in your hand sometimes. And so you have no AoE in that deck, and you feel it. So having a little AoE for 3 mana now.
I feel like with Hunter being quite prevalent, it's
right. You don't need it to be large. You don't need it to do a ton of damage necessarily. You just need it to do some damage.
Did they change it so that it has separate ticks, or will it not clear a Saddle Up board?
It's all the damages at once.
Ah, okay.
Otherwise, that would definitely be helpful. But yeah, this, if you're running into board-based decks where you really feeling if I get behind, because with Hunter, you just have to not get behind with the regular list. And sometimes
Paladin as well, I would imagine.
Paladin as well. You just have to not get behind. Anyway. And sometimes you can do that, especially if you get like your Funnel Cake Clergy turn going on. But other times, having a little AoE would be really nice. So if that's something you're running into, you can check that out. I also included Paul M. from our Discord has been working on an Overheal Priest OTK style. And so I've included his latest iteration here. This is actually using Voodoo Doctor. Voodoo Doctor is a core card. 1 mana, 2/1. Battlecry, restore 2 health.
Man.
That sure is a Hearthstone legal card, a standard legal card.
I recognize the art. I did not recognize the name of this card at all.
Yeah.
But
you see, it's 1 mana, so you can copy it with Pip.
Exactly. It's 1 mana. So you can copy it with Pip. He says it's worth it just for people hovering over it after he plays it. Right? just like what happened. Greedy Partner gives you more cards for your pop-off turn or can help you stabilize a little earlier. Getting down the injured hauler in a board-based matchup with something that can heal it as early as possible is absolutely clutch. So having a coin there is actually really helpful. And just lots of little heals. And I think he's been optimizing for absolute pop-off potential to try to beat warriors because you need to do a lot of damage, but you apparently can if you... this is something that I would take a while thinking about the lines before you start playing. And if you really want to come in, if you have a lot of advice. Yeah, maybe play some games so that you order it correctly. Because it's something that you can easily just not order correctly or not do like the biggest heal on your Hedonist first, which you want to do first, right? Or miss a hero power. Instead of Naga spell, it's hero power card, hero power card, hero power card, which is much less fun to say. But so that's Priest. Rogue, there is... So you can, as Wicked did show research, you can play Excavate Rogue.
Yeah. I mean, the thesis statement is that if the meta slowed down a lot, then you have time to generate a bunch of nonsense and just get enough nonsense in order to win the game. I guess I proved that tonight because there sure was a whole lot of nonsense in that game. And that was probably the slowest deck that I was ever going to play against. So, it's something you can do. If you enjoy it, it's playable, more so than Spell Mage, which I tried and is not nearly as good with everything else that's out there.
Spell Mage just seems is still not quite there. There is a Cutlass Rogue. Either of you tried this Cutlass Rogue?
I played against Donkey was playing it, and I played against it. It's, it's the same thing we talked about at Theory Crafting, right? Like the Spectral Cutlass is a 4-mana 2/2 weapon that gets 1 durability every time you play a card from another class. So if Rogue can do anything right now, it's play cards from other classes. So you just kind of do that, and you run Mic Drop, which gives it attack. You run, this one doesn't run Harmonic. Oh no, it does run Harmonic Hip Hop. And then you've also got Valera's Gift and Deadly Poison. So that's a bunch of poisons, and you really hope your opponent doesn't run Viper. But you just like throw a whole bunch of attack onto it, and if they don't have weapon removal, what are they going to do? Because your weapon's never going away. They play taunts. That's what they do. But it also has lifesteal. So you need to do it out damaging them and protecting your face all at the same time, which is hard for a lot of games to do, but it takes a long time to get there.
Well, we have a list for it. If you're interested in that definitely does not sound quite like my type of deck, but I've never been... The only weapon rogue that I liked, and I will confess, the absolutely, completely toxic poison rogue that would stealth itself in Alterac that like ruined Christmas that year. I actually really enjoyed that deck.
That was one of the few times I climbed into top 500 with that deck because I just decided to play it to learn how it lost and then found out that it didn't.
Who are you two? What?
Listen, I am an enigma wrapped in a mystery. That's what I am.
Oh God, if we're talking about agency. Ooh,
oh yeah, that was absolutely
egregious.
Really,
I hated that deck.
If it's broken, I'm going to abuse it, right? If it's in the game, it is fair game for me to abuse. I didn't say I enjoyed that. I said I climbed high with it. I didn't necessarily enjoy that experience, but I liked winning. So,
I remember there were just enough lines in the mirror. Like a lot of it came down to draw order, but there was just enough lines that I found it interesting enough that I could stand it, because you definitely had to be able to stand the mirror to play that deck, because it was obviously very popular because it was completely broken. But yes, normally not my jam. I did abuse that deck in Alterac. So
the only line that mattered in that deck was the line between your face and the opponent's face. That was the only line.
See, the rogue decks I enjoyed were like Keleseth Rogue, Odd Rogue.
This was an odd rogue. It was very odd until it got nerfed.
And it had lots of poison, so it was literally toxic. For Shaman, we mentioned you can play Reno Shaman. It has a little bit of a problem called Reno Warrior, but otherwise...
A little problem. Just 20% of the meta, no problem.
Just 20%. Otherwise, and I think it has a lot of potential for the future when, obviously mini set will change everything, but when Warrior gets addressed, inevitably, if you enjoy hitting people with frogs and making a Wind Fury so that you can hit them with even bigger frogs faster, that is a thing that you can do with this deck. I also, when I asked in the Discord what are decks that I should talk about that people don't know about, I believe it was Goku put this from a Gray Pirate HS, a Jive Insect build.
It's mid-range Jive Insect.
A mid-range Jive Insect build. It tutors Sand Art Elementals and Backstage Bouncers. And
this is so weird.
It's such a weird deck.
It's very weird.
I'm not quite understanding it. It's got a burn package.
It's trying to do the hybrid druid thing, but with shaman cards, I think. That's what it's trying to do.
I guess. Yeah.
I don't know.
There's a conductivity, I guess, because sometimes things go late enough that you can conductivity Jive Insect, but that's not the goal of the deck.
I don't know. It looks fun for somebody.
Oh, so here's the thing. Pop-up book summons beasts, and Shockhopper is also a beast. So you've got Trusty Companion, which can draw you the Backstage Bouncers. If you Trusty Companion and a Shockhopper, it will either give you Backstage Bouncer or Sand Art Elemental.
My brain is too simple for that. That's way too much. Well, I mean, Shockhopper's going to drop you either a beast or an elemental, though.
Right? Yeah, Sand Art or Bouncer.
Or the other Shockhopper.
Well, sure.
That's the risk that you take. So you can do that instead of Nature Shaman, I suppose. Again, play these things at your own risk, but I thought that was a fun list and was at least working for them. There's also Sludge Warlock. I've definitely been seeing Sludge Warlock some on ladder. It's basically a Sludge Warlock. This list has Demonic Studies. Discover a demon, your next one costs one less.
Yeah, there's some demons that you get, you can get a Doomguard out of it. You can get the secrets demon out of it. Sometimes you just get another Waste Remover, or I guess that's really the only one that's in the deck already, or another Baritone Imp you can sometimes get to, and that can juice up your crescendos. It's decent enough to help you kind of jump the curve a little bit if you need to. I had a little bit of success with that until I played against a Spell Mage who I got down to 1 mana, one health, and I had a whole bunch of sludges at the bottom of my deck, and they played a Yogg box that I don't remember. It 3 of the 5 things were build a board. The last one was the Scourge, and I did not hit the 1 in 8 any of the times with the sludges, and I was done with the deck after that. So.
I built a kind of unusual Sludge Warlock where I eventually was like, I'm not even sure I like Waste Remover anymore. And I just had basically fracking and a one of Chaos Creation as the way to get the sludges on the bottom of your deck. And otherwise I had Doomguards to discard them from hand. And I say it was a weird build because I beat Warriors, but struggled with a lot of other stuff. It was just this thing of you're using all these other cards to set up your pressure, and then you've just been storing sludges on the bottom of your deck all game until you're like, oh, we found the Chaos Creation. Guess you're dead now.
It makes sense as playing that deck in previous metas, you would get sludges stuck in your hand and have kind of too many ways to get them out of the bottom of your deck with Waste Remover and Chaos Creation, and not enough ways to get them out of your hand.
Which is why you were running the 6/8 choose one.
Yeah.
Even, but also now you can't play. You can't do that with Forge of Wills as easily. So that's another reason that's not.
Yeah.
Right. We don't have the Forge of Wills. And then have either of you played Insanity Warlock? That's our last thing on this list.
I did not know this existed. I guess this is going to be the third one of these decks that I can lose ranks with.
This is more of a known entity than some of the other ones that we said. This is
I lost to Mr. Yagut playing this.
So it would be appropriate if you tried this again and lost ranks with it, because the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results.
So I actually, I should have looked up exactly how this combo works before we started, but basically,
so you void Virtuoso, which makes you immune, and then you're gonna basically double insanity them, and I forget what else you have to do with it along the way.
You've got to fizzle so you can get more encroaching insanities.
There used to be a way to double them, I think, right? But they're
but it rotated, right? You used to have the you put it on your death rattle thing. Dark Vein, right?
Yeah, Lady Dark Vein. Yeah, you don't have that anymore.
Sketch Artist gets a temporary copy of the spell as well.
How do we not have Dry Scale Deputy in this deck?
Because there's other spells.
Not that many. There's Fracking, Crescendo, and Furnace Fuel.
Maybe it should be Dry Scale instead of Sketch Artist, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah, Trolley Problem is.
Because Sketch Artist, it has to be in your deck the turn that you play the Sketch Artist. And I mean, you guess it sets up the next crescendos. But
yeah, I think it's also the encroaching insanity makes your crescendo insane.
Right. Yeah. Because so it's not always that you kill them with encroaching insanities, although that is a thing you can do. I think it's just like you play encroaching insanity and have, these defensive tools that aren't in like the sludge decks that run fatigue cards or whatever. So you've got Harp, you've got Virtuoso to protect you, and then you can ultimately go Popgar, Crescendo, Double Sludge for lethal, right?
Yeah, and also I guess the reason it's Sketch Artist is because Crushing Insanity is the only shadow spell in the deck.
Right.
So you're always going to draw Insanity, whereas Dry Scale Deputy would draw you whatever. So
yeah. Well, and you maybe don't even necessarily play Sketch Artist to like play the temporary copy. I imagine there's a lot of times where maybe you just have to Sketch Artist on 3, and that's fine.
Yeah. I mean, I guess getting one to prime the others is not a bad thing either, right? Because then it's 1, 2, then 3, 4 is 7, 5, 6 is 11, so that's 18. If you can just get chip damage in with like all the rest of your minions, maybe that's enough.
Yeah.
Or with Popcar.
Yeah. So this is definitely, this is a known deck. I don't know. Let me see. It apparently does well into Warriors.
Yeah, it makes sense.
That makes sense.
I don't know how you get enough damage, but Well,
you have Fizzle.
Because,
and you have Sketch Artist. And so
the Boom Boss is totally not blown those up by then.
Well, but you're faster, right?
I guess.
Because of fracking.
I guess you could, if you Sketch Artist and then immediately Fizzle, then you get another copy of the Insanity that way.
I'm not even sure you necessarily need that many.
I don't know.
But
yeah, because
this is not the kind of deck I play. So
yeah, they scale so much. It's 18 for the first 3, and then you go from there. Like that's a huge amount of damage.
I played one deck like this, which was cloning Gallery Priest, and I'm not reliving those salad days anytime.
So if you like your complicated burn lethal decks and you don't like Warriors, check this out. So
sounds good to me. Well, I think we spent plenty of time on all these, but we have many folks we'd like to thank. Check out our thanks section on the website at Concede.com, where you can also find our contact info, our show notes, and our Patreon information. You can monetarily support us on patreon.com/CoinConcede. Join us every week live by following us on Twitch at twitch.coinconcede.com. Join our community chats in our Discord at discord.coinconcede.com. And write into our email at coinconcede@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter at CoinConcede, as well as like, share, and follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/CoinConcede. And if you'd like some CC swag, head on over to our shop at shop.coinconcede.com. Big thanks to our producers, Number Theory, Kresh, Beef Squatch, David P., Walu, Jeremy T., Bottled Caps, Grumpy Monk, The Burger Club, Kirk Regan, Forgiven One, Grizzly Bear, and Tyler Knife. Coin Concedes.
Well, I'm just going to coin concede to Maureen for taking extremely good care of me while I was extremely indisposed this weekend. And also everyone who I had to reschedule coachings with this weekend because I couldn't actually sit up at my computer for an hour. So I appreciate everybody being flexible with me. I'm hopefully better. I'm going to take the next dose tomorrow, so we're going to see how that goes. But supposedly the first one is the worst, and then it gets better from there. So we'll finger. And I also know what not to do that made it worse, because I was kind of an idiot on the first couple days that I took the medicine, and which Maureen is also not neglected to remind me of at every available opportunity, which she is entirely her right, because I wasn't dumbass. But hopefully that'll get better. But I appreciate everybody I had to reschedule with, who was very gracious in moving that out a week. So thank you for that.
Cool. Yes.
First, coin concede to the people who said, "Hey, check out Zarimi Priest again." Also, coin concede to Hat in general for communicating so much of the player sentiment, and also just being in the trenches every day of player sentiment. So we really appreciate the amount of communication and the engagement, even when sometimes we don't make it easy for him. So hats off to Hat.
Well, my coin concedes are to Smarms and Tic Tac. Smarms just going through a tough time right now, and I wish her luck. And Tic Tac, because that rogue deck looks absurd, and I know that I'm going to spend some time losing ranks on that one. It looks, hilarious.
All right. Well, that's going to do us for this week. So until next time, keep calm and Burger Ruther. And if you see us on ladder, coin concede.
Coin concede.
Coin concede.
All life must end. I yield for now. I concede. Well fought. I concede.
You win this one.
The victory is yours.
You have bested me.
I give up.
You win this one, friend. You win this time. I choose death.